And to everybody that's joined us, thank you so much for another session and joining us. We all appreciate your time, and we're very grateful for everybody's time. And these things have been really fun for us to be doing. And, you know, we always have amazing questions. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free. We have the Zoom group chat. Just jot down your questions, and we'll make sure that Joel gets them from my end. I'll ask the questions on your behalf, and then hopefully we can address everybody's questions. And I think that's pretty much everybody coming in from the waiting room, so we can kick this off. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for another wonderful session, our culinary series here at the Betsy Hotel. I'm Andrew Zarzosa, the executive chef, and I'm here with the great and powerful Joel Pollock of Panther Coffee, my favorite coffee, and I know most likely Miami's favorite coffee. So without further ado, here's Joel Pollock.
Hey everybody, how are you? Nice to see you.
So Joel, why don't you maybe walk us through the story of how you got started and sort of let folks know where the Panther brand originated?
Yeah, we had visited Miami in I think 2007 or 8, and we were taking a break from Portland, Oregon, where we lived. Definitely thinking about maybe branching out and starting our own business. Leticia and I both had extensive experience in the coffee industry, and we had a really great time in Miami. We got out of the rain in Portland. You know, we like rented a car that was a convertible, all that kind of stuff, you know, and just noticed that there was a great like Cuban coffee scene, but we weren't seeing like a specialty coffee scene that we recognized as like the industry that we knew and that we work in. And we just kind of put it in the back of our mind that it just might be that might be a nice destination for us if we were to decide to open up a business. And we wanted to do a roastery cafe. And when we started thinking about it, it just looked like all signs pointed to Miami.
I mean, all signs pointing to Miami, but like, what was Miami's coffee scene like at that time?
There were like maybe 6 Starbucks, and then a lot of Cuban cafeterias, and more of a Latin coffee scene with bakeries, and just a big gap in between. And I know a lot of people in the industry of different roasting companies, and there's various companies that I knew had like some satellite accounts, companies like Intelligentsia, Stumptown, Counterculture, etc. But nobody was really getting any traction. And after being in Miami for a while, I kind of figured out why, because it's a different animal. We definitely got to know Miami as we became Miamians. It's a different palate, and as a roaster and a green coffee buyer, I definitely noticed that people were showing preferences for different coffees, lower acidity, bigger body, more chocolate. But I'm not a dark roaster, and the easy way to get big body is to roast coffee really hard, but it just turns into like, it tastes like carbon, you know. And I like sweet coffees. I like coffees that taste like chocolate and dried fruit and maybe sometimes citrus. So we really dovetailed what it is that we do to the tastes of our early clientele in wholesale and in Wynwood, which was our flagship original location. I was in there roasting every day, talking to people, just like really talking to people. And what I noticed is that, you know, literally 80% of the people that came through the door grew up in a country that produced coffee. And I had come from Portland, Oregon, which you're going to hear people state that maybe they read something funny on the internet about the coffee industry and they're going to tell you about it. Whereas these guys are telling you what it was like to grow up in the trees of coffee in Nicaragua. And I was like, wow, it's just a whole different mentality. And I, as a green coffee person, buyer, having traveled for the past 20 years, going to those places, being in the hills of lots of coffee producing countries, I really enjoyed talking to those people because that's my world. That's like our back of the house, if you will. And it's a pretty cool connect, which I hadn't even thought about until we got open and on the ground.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you mentioned the flagship, your flagship in Wynwood, and a lot of people I talk to give you credit for actually, bringing that neighborhood to where it is today. How do you feel about that?
I mean, we'll take it, but the reality is it was the cheapest option. And we wanted to open up something that had a...
Yeah, when you guys opened, what was there? What was that like in the first days?
Joey's was there. Butter Gallery was across the street. There were some galleries that were open by appointment only. They would have shows on like once a month. And Joey's is owned by Goldman Properties. So we were the first like non-real estate developer owned retail opportunity. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And what we thought, it was like, what we really need is a showroom for our coffee because we want to do a wholesale program. I liked it because it was one story. I needed a roof penetration for the roaster to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And so we put a hole in the roof, put that roaster in there, and basically you could come in and would have a whole setup of like, okay, if you guys from the Betsy Hotel would consider Panther coffee for your wholesale coffee program, we'll make you like some beverages, taste some coffee together, show you the roasting process over here, and kind of stretch out a little bit in our area. And for that reason, there wasn't a lot of pressure to sell a lot of coffee out of that location, and the rent was cheap. I mean, I can, in a humorous manner, tell you that the first month of rent was $2,500, which we didn't pay till like the third or fourth month because we didn't have any money, and Tony Goldman was really nice to us about it. So it was kind of a wild ride. It was a different world back then. There were big promises about what Wynwood was going to be. We were new to Miami. I didn't know what to believe or if that was true or even if that was relevant to us. We were just wanting to grow a wholesale coffee business with a small retail footprint. It was never a big goal to do a lot of retail because retail is quite exhaustive, and it just grew on its own.
But you guys now are probably, even though you say it wasn't your goal, but your locations, your retail locations now, they're cornerstones of neighborhoods. They're gathering places. I mean, was that like unintentional or? It
just grew on itself. I mean, we had so many people coming into Wynwood, and I mean, it was like realtor central too, which was kind of funny. Like we made a lot of realtors and developers, and a lot of offers came across that counter, and we got really good at saying no and being careful because we had an early success and we wanted to protect that. We had tried really hard to get investors and partners. Everyone said no. So by the time we actually had something like some kind of a nugget, we were like, we're just going to be us without partners. And we were finally able to establish a relationship with a bank, which became very helpful. But in the beginning, it was just, we didn't know the neighborhoods that well. And as we started to get to know Miami, we fell in love with each neighborhood, and we really wanted to put locations in the neighborhoods that sort of reflected how we viewed ourselves fitting into that neighborhood instead of just like a cookie cutter.
Right.
And we had some pretty good help with a good designer friend of ours, Jeffrey Baroni, with developing an aesthetic. We developed our aesthetic in the beginning with some very simple ingredients that we liked the way they looked, but they were also incredibly inexpensive. Raw wood and concrete. And I'd buy these 4x8 sheets of carbon steel at like CNR metals and spray them with rust inhibitor, and they look cool. They just got a little rust on them, and that was like how we got our original identity. And then we kind of refined that over the years.
Nice. So maybe talk to us a bit about your philosophy when it comes to coffee. I mean, I know that might sound like maybe strange to some people, but for sure, I'm sure you have a philosophy and an approach to it. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, it is something that does sound funny to some people at times, and it stopped just sounding funny to me about 15 or 20 years ago. I got into coffee when I was 18 years old, and I was in 1990. So, full transparency on the age thing, but it's just something that getting to know coffee growers, being a participant in the supply chain from cultivation and harvesting and shipping, and then us roasting, and then I came up into the coffee industry through sort of what you call the cafe scene. I became a barista when I was in college, my first year. Serendipitously, there was a roaster located in that room. I was really intrigued by that. I kind of wanted to figure out how it worked. I've always been interested in machines. I came from working in the kitchen. I started working as a dishwasher at age 14 as soon as I had a work permit. It was a cool synergy of a lot of things for me. And I had moved out to Montana. I was in a small town in Montana that had a really cool little culinary scene. And working in this little roastery cafe, I noticed some early trends. I also studied human geography. So at that time, I was pursuing a degree in cultural geography. So it all tied in for me, of like learning about different cultures and how these different microclimates in different regions, and also different varieties of coffee and cultivation techniques can produce all different manner of flavors. And then as a roaster, you can also tweak that too. And so it's quite a lot of variables. And, a lot of customers, they may want to hear some of that. They may not want to hear all of that. They want to hear like the top two things. And I've learned that. As much or as little about this coffee as you want to hear.
Okay, I think we're having.
I could talk about it for a long time, and putting together coffee menu for us.
Sorry, Joel. Sorry not to cut you off, but we're hearing a little bit of there's a little bit of interference, or I guess connection issues. I think we kind of missed the last couple things that you said.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
It's still kind of dicey. But we're gonna try now.
Okay.
Perhaps the area. By the way, just so everybody knows, Phil's on his way up north, and he's obviously on the road, so it's probably not something to do with the connection. So we apologize for that at the moment. Let's see if it's gotten better. Joel, are you with us still? You're good? Can you hear us? Oh. I think it's, oh, okay. I think you're back.
Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. So sorry, everybody.
Let me know if you can hear me, and I'll jump in.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So apologize. Putting together a coffee menu is something we like to give some thought to. We like to have a simple, well thought out menu of coffees that not only represent a wide variety of aesthetics for flavor, but also trusted partners that we like to work with, that we feel offer a fair shake to their workers on the farm. Most of the areas we find coffee are in very economically challenged, or places which are very hard to make a living. And to find good coffee, you have to pay a premium to get good coffee, and we like to know that premium is going not just to the producer, but also to the farm workers and their families, and they're working in conditions that are good and just and humane, and things like schools and clean water and sanitation on the farm, and participation in that with the families. Also, not working with super giant farms, working with smaller farms or medium-sized farms. That way we have a voice and we have a participation in what's happening, rather than just getting on the list and getting like a tiny bit of a mega farm's product. So there's a lot of care and thought that goes in there, and relationships improve over time, and eventually sometimes they change depending on how things go and how what happens with each sort of transactional relationship. But I like coffees that have a lot of body and a lot of chocolate, and we've found that those are the coffees that really do well in the context of Miami. Nicaragua and Brazil are probably our two largest origins. I was working with farmers in Brazil since about 2003. I met Leticia, who is Brazilian. Turns out she grew up about 45 minutes away from all these farms that I was working with and I had visited back in the early 2000s. And those are still our main Brazil coffees. And it's very gratifying. Those are old friends. And same for Nicaragua. The Finca La Amistad is a coffee that I used to work with Francisco Javier Valle Garcia at Stumptown back in Portland, Oregon. And we were roasting together. He taught me what I call a coffee Spanish. And I showed him how to roast coffee on a large machine. And we've been really good friends ever since. So the name of the farm is Apropos. And other coffees are iconic. Coffee's native to Ethiopia. You can't not have an Ethiopian coffee on your menu. We like the washed Ethiopian coffees. They're bright. They're citric. There's nothing like it. The coffee grows just on a plateau in Ethiopia. They're wild. They grow wild. They don't have names for the variety because they just grow there, and they're very hardy because they're native indigenous plants. And it's just, as a coffee person, an amazing experience to visit Ethiopia. There's others that we bring in throughout the year. Guatemala has an amazing coffee industry. We have some great relationships there. El Salvador as well. Bolivia and Colombia. Those are relationships that we've been cultivating, no pun intended, over the past several years. And particularly this project last couple of years in Cauca, Colombia is very interesting because it's in conjunction with a project called Coffee for Peace, and it's sort of post-conflict. Cauca, as a buyer for me, was never open because it was a little dangerous to go to. It was very, there were a lot of kidnappings and bombings and stuff. And last few years I've been going there, participating in a cupping event, and subsequently an auction after that. And we buy coffee on that auction, and coffee's really beautiful, really wonderful. And it was good because it's a small project and we were in the beginning of it. So now we've been doing it for a few years and it's growing. And we've been buying coffee from the same producers. I went out to visit them each time and offer them premiums on the coffee. And it's the kind of money that, in the context of a Miami economy may be a different context. But in the hills of Sotara, outside of Popayan, in the department of Cauca, it's amazing what a little bit can do. And we try to do as much as we can, keeping in mind that we are a business as well. So that's short story on how we put together a coffee menu.
Wow. Well, certainly a lot goes into it and a lot of logistical stuff, huh?
Yeah, and it's really the fun, it's the joy. I mean, that sort of pleasure of being able to navigate that and participate in that is very gratifying, and I feel lucky that we get to do that for ourselves.
Right. So like, I mean, that there's beans from, all over the place. Is there somewhere that you haven't tried yet and are looking to kind of explore, or is it there's enough on your sort of where you source from now to keep you busy? Obviously, it's a lot of places.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, because earlier today we were talking about Indonesia because I know you used to live there.
Yeah.
That is a country and it's a vast region because in coffee we don't really say Indonesia, we say each individual island because the coffees are different and the cultures are different, as you know. We've roasted some Sumatran coffee.
Mhm.
In other past lives, I've roasted a lot of coffee from Indonesia. Uh, it's called, I think, Flores now. It was
Yeah.
Sulawesi or
Mhm.
Celebes before that, and
Yeah.
Java. So those are some territories that would be interesting to develop some relationships. Um, Part of the Miami experience for us is that the relationships that we had were based primarily out of South and Central America, and being, you jump on Spirit Airlines and boom, you're there. And
Yeah.
we kind of broke the African frontier a few years ago. Have always roasted the coffee, but had not had an opportunity to really visit there.
Hmm.
Spent some time in Ethiopia and another trip in Uganda. I had a very interesting trip to Uganda. We received a cold email from the Ugandan Coffee Development Agency asking if we had somebody that would like to participate in a cupping in Kampala, Uganda, and then they'd have an auction. So they paid for my ticket and my lodging, so I went. Why would I not go? And I ended up visiting a farm there. It stayed for 10 days. It was about an hour flight. And the only reason there was a flight because it was near what they call the impenetrable forest and the largest silverback gorilla reserve in Uganda, which is a huge tourist destination for a lot of South African and UK tourists. So I took that flight and we buy the coffee now. It's a very interesting coffee, and it's just kind of in those weird organic ways that we grow our list of, like, that's how we add this producer to our list. And for South and Central America, a lot of those producers were people that would literally walk through the door, hand me a sample of coffee, and give me a business card because they were done with their harvest and they were able to take a 4-day weekend in Miami, and they had heard about Panther coffee. So we have some pretty cool relations out of that.
That is cool. And I guess because coffee is sort of very global and you're all over the place and from continent to continent, I'm sure there's there's got to be variations in the way they sort of drink and prepare coffee and the culture that's associated with that. Is there anything interesting that you saw in particular, like going to the different countries and seeing how they consume the coffee itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The two largest consumers of coffee that also produce coffee, from what I understand, are Ethiopia and Brazil.
Hmm.
Brazil drinks a lot of coffee. Ethiopia drinks a lot of coffee, but still in those cases, most of that is exported as a cash crop. And the more expensive coffees tend to go to European countries, sometimes Japan or Korea, and the United States, North America, Canada. The Ethiopian coffee ceremony is very interesting. They roast it right there in front of you, grind it, pour it, and the coffee stays suspended in there. And it's always in this little cup that's got like a little kind of Rastafarian flag and lion. And it's delicious. It's a whole different experience. It's not like any experience I've had with coffee. Brazil's very much an espresso country, and then the other coffees, cafezinho, is kind of a coffee prepared with sugar, especially out more in everywhere, but especially where the farms are. It's what most people drink. There's a lot of it around, and it's pretty strong, very black, and it's delicious. It's a different flavor. I'm a person that needs caffeine every day. I made coffee in a hotel room today out of these little coffee tea bags with our coffee, with our Brazil. And then I iced it down and I put it in a water bottle and I drank it all morning. And it was delicious. And I have fun with that kind of stuff. But a lot of the countries that we work with don't drink their own coffee. And that ends up being a little bit of a logistical challenge. So what we do is we try to spread the word about what coffee cupping is and how to evaluate quality. Try to send a message, because in some scenarios there are people who are like called professional cuppers, and they work in a lab. They wear a lab coat. They carry a clipboard around. They have a cupping spoon, and they use very specific parameters to taste the coffee. And that's a very legit thing. I mean, those are the inner workings of our industry. I always try to send the message to the producer, like, when you eat your lunch or your dinner, no one tells you what that tastes like. And we can taste this coffee together and talk about like where to go with certain directions of cultivation, especially processing, which is how you get the coffee fruit off of the coffee bean and then dry it down to a stable level. And those techniques are what can really make or break a coffee. And once we receive a coffee, we can't make it taste any better, but we can raise it up to its fullest potential, which is, in a way, you're a chef, you're a kitchen person, and it's like a really great ingredient. And in so many ways, a really great chef knows how to stay out of the way. And we do the same thing with coffee. We source out great coffees with great partners, and we stay out of the way and let the coffee do the talking. And it's fun.
That's awesome. We have a few questions if you want to take some of these right now.
Okay.
So what differences do you find between regular coffee and organic coffee?
That's a very interesting question. The main differences are what we see on the farm. And in fact, some of the coffees that we buy are organic. We don't always market them as organic. Part of the issue that we've had, me as a buyer, is that there is a really big disconnect between what's geographically disconnected, and most farms are going to be inspected about once a year from a visit. It's going to be a very high cost, upwards to $5,000 to $10,000, and for some producers, it's just not a possibility. In terms of cup quality, that is something that just really depends a lot more on the producer. The reason we visit farms and work directly with producers is that we work on a direct trade model. We're very much in favor of natural production, organic production, but organic has a certification requirement that sustainable techniques does not carry that same requirement. And there are times when some of our producers may, in a very judicious manner, use a little bit of fertilizer as often as possible. We like that to be natural. And that does make a coffee, its flavor, it's like food for the coffee, just like any other garden. And it's really a case-by-case scenario, but the main thing that we look for is upon visiting the farm, talking with the producer and seeing the trees and cupping the coffee together, that we're not seeing a lot of chemicals around, a lot of herbicides and pesticides and things like that. We're actually looking into pursuing our certification as a processor. So as a roaster, you're considered a processor by the Department of Agriculture. To be able to send that message of which coffees that we do roast are organic. I never hung my hat on that on purpose, because I was a little worried that some of the coffees, even though they were labeled as such, may or may not be organic. But with the amount of visits that we've done, we will market the ones that we know for sure are really organic, and that'll be kind of the next phase for us.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I have another question here. What's your opinion on flavoring coffee with macadamia nuts, etc., things like that?
Now that's a beach ball. So that question is interesting because when I was 18, 19 years old, I worked at a coffee roasting company back in Montana, and we actually did flavored coffee. It's a concentrate that you put on the coffee while it's still hot. I would shake it in a bucket and then pour it into a plastic bag. There really are not a lot of natural flavor ingredients for flavoring. So for flavored coffee, if you're flavoring the beans. So what we think is that we prefer the flavor of the coffee to come from the ground or the variety or what we call the hand of the producer. And there's a lot of flavors going on there. And at the end of the day, in our cafes, in a retail scenario, we could provide some things like vanilla syrup or nut milk or half and half. And if a person chooses that, we think is a great way to add a flavor to the beverage. Mm-hmm. And we make no judgment. We're very clear about the fact that when you buy a coffee beverage in our establishment, once you have it, you own it, it's yours. And we even provide things for you to put that into there if you'd like. Although we encourage people to try the coffee beforehand and see, because it's a little mellower, a little milder, a little bit more chocolatey, caramely than your average cup of coffee. So, yeah.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, because I mean, for sure, it's like sometimes you just want a little vanilla in there. Why not? Yeah. I mean, sometimes you do.
My favorite coffee beverage that has flavor is a cold brew that has a little bit of half and half, a little bit of ice, and a little bit of simple syrup that was infused with a vanilla bean, and it tastes like coffee ice cream. And we like to joke that that's like gateway coffee. I mean, if you don't like that, you might not have a pulse. And you could use nut milk, but it's just delicious. And I drink black coffee, but I drink that too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely like similar to what we have at our Ventanita. We have the cold brew on tap, which is it tastes so delicious. I mean, yeah, no, I'm with you on that sentiment. All right, we got another question. Thoughts on Mexican coffee seems to be finding its way into third wave coffee locations.
Yes, interesting question. I'm glad that question was asked. I've been visiting Mexico in the southernmost part of Mexico near the Guatemalan border, near the city of Tapachula. A Mexican coffee project is invited by some other producers. One is from Colombia, one is from Brazil, one is from El Salvador, and it's an experimental farm. They're working on coffee varieties in Chiapas that are rust, or in Spanish, roya resistant. And coffee rust is a very big plague for coffee growers throughout South and Central America. It's essentially a fungus that attacks the trees it's a sort of an immunodeficiency, and the trees end up dropping their leaves, and if not taken care of properly, will eventually die. And so it's a very cool project because we need to hybridize. It's not genetic engineering. It's really just grafting and hybridizing coffee plants to be the most resistant without sacrificing the flavor. And that's been something that is a really big push in our industry because, 20, 30 years ago, you'd have government agencies getting involved. In Colombia, it was the Federation and various other countries. And they would push these what's called a Robusta species. Many people have probably heard of that. It's a much more hardy coffee variety, but it has a much less desirable taste. It has almost a rubbery taste. It tastes like a rubber tree. So moving forward to the last 10, 15 years, people are learning to graft these varieties that still have the hardiness, but have excellent cup characteristics. And that's what that project is about in Mexico. And in fact, we're receiving coffee in the next couple of weeks from this project. It's our third year in a row. And I'm really excited about it. And it's something that I had always wanted to do because I had roasted coffee. Mostly it was from Oaxaca, but I had never been there So I was really, really excited and proud to be able to visit and participate in this project. And I love the coffee.
Wow, that's exciting. I would love to try that. Being part Mexican myself, so
Awesome.
never had Mexican coffee, so it'd be something to
It's
cool.
good. I'll make sure you get some.
Yeah, for sure. All
What's
right,
interesting about that coffee, it's on the border. It's basically the other side of Huehuetenango in northern Guatemala. So
uh-huh.
it's a lot of the same microclimates. It's just the other side of the mountains.
Okay, that makes sense. It's almost like the wine regions
Yeah.
separated by a valley, or yeah, cool. All right, I got another question. This one's thanks, Joe. Thanks for this, Joe. Question: I have a coffee plant in my backyard in Little Haiti. I swear, I harvested and sun-dried beans about a cup. I want to roast them at home, but have no clue how. How can I best do it? I have them in my freezer and don't know what to do with the beans. Thanks.
Okay, that's cool. There's a few ways to do that. It's definitely challenging. The key is, well, first of all, to make sure that the fruit was
Oh
removed
no.
because it's got a red skin, and then there's some fruit, and then
Mhm.
inside there is the coffee bean. And you got to get rid of the fruit and get rid of that husk. And once you have that, recommend to keep it in the fridge or the freezer. And once you have that, you can use a skillet on a very low heat. You got to keep it moving I would recommend a wooden spoon that doesn't have a lot of food aroma on it, and just keep it moving. I would say, try to stretch it out to 8 to 12 minutes and keep it moving enough to where you don't see any scorching. And at some point you're going to hear a little pop. And that happens when you toast other things. Like during the last few months, I've been doing a lot of cooking at home, toasting sesame seeds, toasting cumin seeds. And it's funny because they all have the same first crack, just like coffee. And I've been roasting coffee forever. I didn't know these other seeds do the same thing. But if you get to first crack, you've got enough flavor development to go. I say pull them. After that, put them on a plate that you've kept in the fridge or the freezer, and then keep them moving till they've cooled down, because they will have some what we call thermal momentum, and they'll continue to roast, and they'll even scorch.
Oh yeah. Wow, that's next level. Hopefully that answered the question. Yeah, okay, got a thumbs up. So cool. We got more questions. I can't tolerate caffeine and I love coffee. What is your feeling about decaf and how is it processed?
Very cool question. I'm proud to answer that question because we've put a lot of careful thought into the decaf that we do buy and roast. I've been working with the same decaf plant since long before we opened Panther Coffee. It's called Descamex. It's in Mexico, and the process is called mountain water. So it's a natural process. Basically, the coffees are. This is probably quite a simplification, but the coffees are soaked in these giant vats, one container at a time. So a container of coffee is roughly 40,000 pounds of coffee, and it's soaked in these very large containers, and then the water has all the essential oils. They refer to it as flavor charged water. Those are filtered through a series of charcoal filters. Now, part of the reason that decaf is more expensive is because, or say part of the reason naturally processed decaf is more expensive is because you can't recover the caffeine. Whereas with a chemical process caffeine, there was a big article in National Geographic like 10 years ago. The caffeine is in all soft drinks, comes from the chemical decaffeination of coffee, and it's sold to the soft drink companies. In this case, the caffeine stays in the filter. They evaporate the water back into the coffee bean. The coffee beans have a slight brown color, but are not roasted by the time we get them. I don't drink decaf coffee on a regular basis, but we have a system of coffee that we've been buying. It's Brazilian coffee that is sent to Mexico, then it's decaf and then shipped through to Laredo, Texas, and shipped up through there. And I make myself a decaf Americano before I place every order of decaf, and to make sure that I'm still happy with it. And I can say that the decaf coffee that we sell is delicious. It's 100% natural, and I stand behind it. It's like, we're proud of it. And it's no caffeine. Interesting, you do learn what caffeine tastes like. It has a high astringency, and that's not there. But all the other flavors are there, and it's yummy.
Nice. That's I guess this is a good segue to the next question, which is a good talking point on that. Talk about your development of your palate and how long before you had the confidence in your own opinion about flavors.
Well, I came up at a time in this industry when the industry was very different. There was much less differentiation. You'd go into a coffee shop and somebody would say that they have Guatemalan coffee. At this point in my life, I mean, we're talking about down to the GPS location of the farm, and the name of the farm, the name of the variety, all the techniques and all that. But at the time when I was first doing it, we were tasting Guatemalan Antigua, Colombian Supremo. There was very little explanation about what the coffees were. But as an 18-year-old working in a coffee shop, part of my job was to choose the coffee that was the coffee of the day. And I found very quickly that I was able to differentiate, and not only differentiate, but to describe the coffees to the customers in a way that seemed to resonate with them. And I think that built a lot of early confidence with me. But to be fair, it was a whole different world. It was much simpler. And I just think I grew with the industry, and having cupped coffee, cupping is that slurping where we taste the coffee and generally spit it out. And we atomize the coffee into the back of your palate, and you aerate the coffee a little bit so you can get the olfactory experience as well. Something I've been doing, most days for the better part of 30 years. So you do that with other people and you work with them for years and years at a time. You talk to farmers and you talk about their coffee and get calibrated with them, meaning that we speak the same language, and we may not have the same opinion, but we understand what each person is experiencing when they taste it. And it just kind of developed over time. There's really you can palate develop. We do that sometimes at Panther Coffee in wholesale and retail, where we'll taste, different fruits or different anythings and talk about the flavors. And I think that's a fun kind of parallel activity that causes you to just get into the experience and kind of let it overwhelm you. Like, what are you tasting? Another cool, interesting thing is to blindfold. It's probably a little pretentious to some people, but tasting things blindfolded, it really makes you have to think. And is this like salt, or is this a piece of lime, or like it's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's cool. That is cool. But I mean, in terms of do you feel like there was a particular moment in your career with coffee where you felt like, I have very, set like a strong passion or view on a particular kind of coffee or a style of roast, or, that kind of thing? Or did it just happen?
I think so. I think about 10 years in, that was a time when I started roasting on different machines where we had more control over the roast level, and not only the end, like the color of the coffee at the end, but like what we call the roast curve. So it's like, what temperature is the roast at each minute or each second of the roast? And it turns out that has a tremendous bearing on the outcome of the flavor. And interestingly enough, at that time, it was the early 2000s, the specialty coffee industry in terms of differentiation and was what many people were calling the third wave of coffee. We were starting to understand way more information from the producer side. What was the variety? What was the processing? And so we had access to this information, and all of a sudden we had 10 different factors that we could describe and think about instead of just one, which was the name of the country, or maybe two, the name of the country and the name of the farm. And we got to the point to where one farm might have like 15 or 20 lots from each different day or each different microclimate of the farm. Each section of the farm might have experimental lots that were different varieties. I was lucky enough to participate in an event called the Cup of Excellence, the Taza de Excelencia, in all the countries throughout Central America. I did one in several in Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, and I would go there for like a week to 10 days. It was an event that was partially funded by USAID, and the event was designed to boost the coffee industry and help the coffee buyers and ultimately the coffee consumer understand which areas in each country were producing a higher level of coffee based on the expertise in production, and also really a lot of it came down to elevation and microclimates. And subsequently auctions would happen and all of us roasters would compete over the price, and I would get much better pricing for the individual farmers. And then us roasters would go back in and buy coffees at, 2 to 3 times the price that they were getting before this program. And so a lot of the farms that we buy from now, that's where those relationships came from. And that all started to happen right around the year 2000 to the year 2002. And it was a kind of a big sea change. It allowed us access as roasters and buyers to a universe of information that was really relatively opaque, and the only people who had access to that were the importers. And turns out that a lot of those importers were kind of keeping a lot of the profit, and it just became a transparent experience to where now, the buying process is transparent. I know what the farmer gets paid. I'm happy to have the importer paid, but it's a fair price based on what they do, because for the most part, we're sourcing the coffee, we're doing the quality control, we're doing the quality guarantee, which in the old days was something that the importer would do. So they don't have to back the quality. We have to back the quality. All they have to do is move the coffee and have an importation license and have some insurance. And so that's when everything changed. And our business is based very much on that new model of coffee. It wasn't like that when I first started in coffee.
Oh, well, I know certainly, like, when these things we talked about when I lived in Indonesia with our partners over there, and especially in countries over there where, farmers and things, they don't have particularly the people behind companies like Panther trying to sort of champion, fair pay to the farmers and, living wage and stuff like that. So it's good to see that more and more it's happening, and it's kind of spreading out all over the world. It's something that kind of, I feel like, being a chef, you want to support your farmers, your fishermen and all that stuff. And it's so important that I think people need to know more about that. And, there's a whole economy that goes behind restaurants, you know what I mean? And it's sometimes, when you sit down at a cafe or at a restaurant, you have a meal, you have a coffee, sometimes you don't think about it, but there's so much that goes behind, and there's so many people's livelihood that's at stake. So it's really cool that you guys do that.
Well, I think it's really interesting you say that, because I think what you do and what we do, there's a tremendous amount in common, and I'm not sure if you like the farm to table term. I got a little tired because everyone started using it, but for coffee, that's kind of what we're talking, is farm to cup, where people know where it comes from, and that's part of the story. But ultimately it's about the quality, and it's about the transparency and the fairness. Fair trade is a program that is a brand name. You have to have a certification and you have to pay to the third party, but we prefer relationship coffee, where we just pay more for the coffee, and that way they're receiving all the money from the coffee, and it guarantees a better product too. It puts us in a situation to have more fun with what we're doing with the coffee as well.
Yeah, no, totally. There's another comment or question here. Coffee and food. Are you a purist? Should it be kept separate? Or are there foods that you want to be eating when you have your special coffee moment?
I'm not exactly a purist. It's against consuming coffee with food, but I do tend to enjoy coffee before food. I like to say that I have an Italian breakfast every day. I think that I don't smoke. I don't smoke cigarettes, but to me, the Italian breakfast, yeah, the Italian breakfast is
cigarette, right?
well, also sparkling water. It's espresso, cigarette, and sparkling water. So I don't smoke. So I just have the espresso, the sparkling water, and that's my breakfast. And I think my most interesting food experience with coffee comes in Brazil with a pão de queijo. It's a cheese bread.
Delicious.
Basically, it's very savory, and I've always found that when you eat that like cheesy little soft piece of bread that's crisp on the outside, and you drink an espresso, it enhances the sweetness a lot, and it makes the coffee just that much more like it just pops. It's really cool. I one time did a coffee pairing with cheese class. I participated in one. I didn't put the class on, which sounds bizarre, but the saltiness and the brininess and the funkiness of some of the cheese compared to some of the coffees, it was really wild. So it's definitely a thing.
No, for sure. I mean, I couldn't help but notice like a lot of similarities also in chocolate. And you know, my wife and I, we were friends with a lot of there was a community of French people in Malaysia, oddly enough, and how they would drink their coffee was with like a piece of like super bitter chocolate.
Oh, nice.
They'd have espresso and chocolate, right? And so that always kind of stayed with me. And then I thought about it. And then when we moved to Indonesia, and you know, I met two friends of mine who run a chocolate and a coffee company. And then I would try it together, and they would say, look, you know, this, you know, chocolate is from Flores, and this, you know, coffee is Sumatran, and you can taste because of the terroir, you know, like I don't know how to explain it, but there's these nuances, right? But they're so similar. And when you eat it with the chocolate and you drink it with the coffee, it's like this really incredible experience. Like you can really taste the flavors there. And I guess because the two, you know, beans are very similar in a way and sort of grown in very similar climates and regions. Yeah, for me, that was interesting, at least.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I love the coffee chocolate pairing. We have this project in Haiti, and the same cooperative that we're working with the coffee grows a lot of cacao. And they were hoping that I also could buy the cacao. I was like, I don't know anything about it. I don't know how to do it. But we were able to hook up a local chocolate maker, Exquisito Chocolate, and bring her name's Caroline. And she started coming on the trips and became a buyer for some of those cacao producers. And the coffee came out amazing. And we even did some chocolate that had the Haitian coffee in it. It was kind of a cool tie-in.
Cool.
A lot of interesting flavors.
Yeah, for sure. Here's a very good, straightforward question, but I think a great question. How do you make a good cup of coffee at home?
Well, that's a cool question. There are a lot of ways to do that. My most simple and favorite way is a simple pour over. There's one called a Kalita Wave that I like. There's the old Melitas, which they were the original ones. There's a Chemex, which maybe predates the Melitas. Anything that's shaped in a funnel with a paper filter, medium to fine grind, no powder, so it doesn't just turn over extract for a long time, but not too coarse, so it doesn't just whiz through there and not really extract. And then I like to do a series of pulses and pours. The first pour, just a little bit to saturate. The second, to do just enough to get the water above the grounds level, and then let it go all the way down. And, you know, I'm kind of the kind of person that's only brewing coffee at home, like on a Sunday, because I'm in the shops most other days, excepting the last few months, right? But basically, I like those pour overs. There's one called an AeroPress, which is almost looks like a big syringe. You put the coffee in the tube, you put the plunger in, you put the end on with the filters, and then you plunge it after 4 minutes. Super simple. Builds a little bit of pressure, which adds to the body. Those are like my favorites, and it's really easy to make cold brew at home. You could take a jar or a cup, any kind of carafe, and basically coarse ground coffee or drip ground coffee. Let it soak for 3 to 6 hours, depending on how coarse it is. and then filter it off. Start off with a mesh stainless and then filter it with some paper. It's delicious cold brew, super easy to make.
Hey, were you ever one of those guys that got like the super fancy, expensive manual espresso machines at home?
Yes and no. Super expensive, no. I was working as a production roaster, but I found a used La Pavoni uh, lever espresso machine at a garage sale when I was
Yeah.
living in Portland, and it was pretty cool. It had two levels, one for steaming milk and one for making espresso. You'd have two switches, and you put both switches on, and it would sound like a freight train. It would give off so much steam pressure, and you could only make 4 or 5 shots. You throw that, it was a tiny little puck. It was like, can't see, but probably 9 grams, and usual for us is like 14 to 17 grams. And you had 4 or 5 levers because it was a pretty small boiler. These days, there's some amazing machines out there, and I never had really the money to buy those at that time. I probably would have done that. But also, I was working in a coffee shop, so anytime I wanted to, I could walk behind the bar. From year 1990, I could walk behind any bar that I worked in and pull a shot on a La Marzocco espresso machine, which to my mind is the best machine ever made. We took a family trip to Italy, and we even toured the factory, which is in Florence, in Italy, and just a cool company. But I've been more esoteric with my coffee equipment, kind of more like weird little things like roasting coffee on a popcorn popper. And we do cuppings, so I do cuppings at home. So I pour like a little bit of coffee grounds in the bottom, kind of a drip grind, maybe a little tiny bit coarser. Pour the water, let it form a crust, break the crust. After 4 minutes, of course, break the crust, scrape the foam off, and then you just take a spoon that has a pretty good bowl, and you take that and you scoop that into a little cup and leave the grounds in the cup. Makes an amazing cup, and it tastes every bit as good as a $200, $400 brewer that you get at wherever.
Wow, that's cool. That's interesting. Yeah. I guess one last question, and then we'll wrap it up because I see that we're running out of time. What are some least acidic coffees? What are least acidic coffees?
So the least acidic coffees there's 2 factors. One of them is the kind of the area in which the coffee is grown. Lower altitude coffees are a little less acidic. Ones that I like to have a lower altitude but a higher latitude, meaning that they have a greater distance from the equator, and so a greater seasonality, which creates a difference in heating and cooling and allows the coffee bean to mature at a slower rate, are some of the Brazilian coffees that we buy. So they're grown around 1,200 meters, whereas some of the high-grown Colombias and Guatemalans and Ethiopians that we buy are grown at 1,900 meters, and they're going to have the most pronounced acidity. So the Nicaraguan coffee that we buy is grown around also 1,200 meters, and they're high enough grown to have a great definition and a very clean cup, because if coffees are grown like 900 meters or below, they tend to get a little muddy, murky, and a little flat. But that sort of what I call mid-altitude coffee tends to have the lowest acidity. And then the other factor is that if you put a little more development in the roasting machine on a coffee, so for example, in our shops, our Brazilian coffee or our East Coast espresso or our cold brew would fit the bill on any of that. In our wholesale program, for the benefit of our hotel customers, especially who have a lot of international visitors, that don't have a great affinity for acidity, did a blend called 1927 with the imagination that the espresso in 1927, which is also the year of our roaster, and is also the year that espresso was introduced in New York City, first espresso machine in the United States. Probably that espresso was a little more simple, and I bet you it was a little blend. It's not super roasty compared to what you can find in the marketplace, but you can taste a little bit of a carbonization mixed with the sweetness of the coffee. And those are lowest acidity coffees.
Okay, Joel, I think we're losing you again. We heard what you
Am I still with you?
we heard that what you thought the espresso tasted like back then, and then we lost you.
Okay.
I don't know if we have you back.
Just those would be our most file. How about now?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say Brazil, Nicaragua, East Coast espresso, cold brew for us. Those are the lowest. And you know, in a restaurant or a coffee shop where there's a wide appeal,
Nope. Okay.
that we're looking for, we usually Brazil or Nicaraguan coffee because we know that if you like coffee, anyone's going to like it.
Cool.
How about now?
It's in and out, but anyway, we're approaching the hour mark, so I just want to thank you so much, Joel, and I want to thank all of the people that have tuned in, and I see some familiar faces coming every week, so thank you for tuning in